sensors, satellites, which are going to affect our production processes. You may not know, but China today has 3 or 2 million robots who are working in their factories. And China is now producing 30% of the entire manufactured output of the world. Last year, they added 300,000 robots, and the US added only 44,000. That is the difference between the two countries. And that is how the productivity in China is such that they are able to sell their solar panels, their EVs at prices which are affordable by developing countries. That is number one. So you have a technology which is changing, and how do we adapt? 5 years ago or 6 years ago, when we were negotiating the CPAC power, nobody knew that grid will become totally irrelevant after a while, and it will be a decentralized, energy distribution, which will be led by the renewables. We didn't know that at that time. But it's the job of SDPI to assess as to what the global trends are and how they are going to impact. The fourth global trend is the geopolitical situation, that you have the US is becoming more inward-looking, unlike its past, and it is more protectionist, and it is getting away from multilaterals. It has already dissolved USAID, and therefore all the bilateral aid from the US has disappeared. And it's also not participating in WHO, in WTO, in UNESCO, and other bodies. What implications that has for Pakistan? And finally, we have the question whether we maximize our external relations for niches where China is advanced and where the United States is advanced, because we are trying to keep good relations both with the United States as well as China. What do we learn from Chinese and what do we extract from the US is something only the think tanks can really come up with, because you have a non-political and non-partisan view. These are the global trends. And how do you find out the implications and the consequences for Pakistan economy over 5 years, fine-tuned? So that is where I said this is a supply side. Then you make policymakers aware of these changes and these challenges. You can write papers, but if you don't make them aware, then you're not going to be of much use. These papers, when I was in the PM office, I had a whole shelf full of the policy papers, strategy papers, plans, everything, but they were just there. Nobody was really following them up. So you have that challenge, how to make them sensitive, but also lead them to action. Then I think careful framing of the question, research question, which is you're going to be explored, and its design strategy is very, very important. If you do not know how to frame the research question, your study would not be very useful. So you have to pay a lot of attention. And I expect senior researchers here to guide the younger one in actually educating, training them, giving them hands-on, on the job advice and counseling, mentoring, how to frame the questions and how to design the strategy to find the conclusions which are relevant. Because I find that most of the problem arises because you haven't framed the right question, and therefore the conclusions are absolutely of no value. So that is what I consider is very, very important. I was very much impressed by an organization called, which is now dead, which is Overseas Development Council in Washington, which was doing research for the developing countries. And they did not actually go out for dissemination till they had two intermediary points. For example, your center produces a research report. You must have an internal seminar in order to critique that report and get the feedback from everyone. Because the kind of diverse knowledge and experience you have, you should benefit from that. And please don't take criticism as personal affront. The difference between the World Bank and the government of Pakistan, which I noticed, was that we had the internal discussion and we would criticize the report to the hilt. But at the end, we'll say, come, let's go and lunch together. Here, if you criticize, you stop talking to each other. You become personal enemies. That is the end of any research effort. You should not personalize, but you should be frank enough. Second, I find that youngsters who have good ideas are very reluctant, very shy to speak in front of the seniors because they think we may annoy them, we may antagonize them, or if we're talking, against their views, they may actually be very much against us. So that shyness is the enemy of good internal discussion. You should be all very open-minded. Actually, you should welcome. And the women perspective is totally different from men's perspective. So listen to them, what they have to say. Just don't dismiss that casually, because you're losing a lot of enrichment if you do that. And don't be highly opinionated. I can tell you that I am a believer in lifelong learning. Today I write it not on the basis of what I learned 10 years ago, but on the basis of what I'm learning today. And that is what keeps you intellectually alive. Otherwise, you say, oh, this is my opinion. Don't show me the facts because the facts confuse me. I say, oh, if these are the facts, I change my views. Abid knows this. We have been in the World Bank regional groups. But there was a lot of resistance against the climate change in the beginning. But now, everybody realizes this is already there. We don't have to resist. So the evidence and the facts have convinced even the naysayers that things have changed. But if you just stuck to your doctrinaire views that this is what is going to happen, you will never get anything done. So don't be opinionated. Don't hold strong. If the evidence shows, change your opinions. Then the second stage will be when you have the internal discussions, then bring in the external stakeholders. Bring in the staff of the government ministries, departments, media, the other external academics. If you have chance, send them for external peer review before you have the second seminar where you bring in all the stakeholders. Modify your findings, your conclusions in the light of the feedback you get from the policymakers, from the media, from the academics, from the other stakeholders. And I can assure you that your product will be in great demand everywhere if you go through this process, because you have actually made a lot of effort. But now every one of us wants to become famous every day. So what we do, instead of doing research, we write op-ed pieces in the newspapers and we go on the talk shows while we haven't done our homework. So we are actually spitting out shallow pieces of, opinions, which has nothing to do with the process. My process is very long and it is hard to go through this. But I can tell you that if you are interested in the quality and impact, this is the way it has to be. So that is what, and then you have formal launch, invite the media, the parliamentarians and others, do the formal launch and give it a lot of publicity. And, today's world of the social media, you have small video clip where you have the messages, and that is where I think you will gain a lot. Now I come through the demand driven. This is the supply side, that you scan the global trends, trace out their consequences, work on those, and then disseminate that. But you have to choose. Of all these researchers, okay? I'm happy to hear a lot of centers say two things, which pleases me. One is the monitoring of the government policies and programs, which is a real time. And today, data analytics and big data have become so handy to you that you can do the real-time monitoring. But all of you have to be trained in data analytics. The old ways of doing regressions, collecting samples, going and doing the surveys is very, very expensive. And you cannot afford to do that. Do that, too, but use the big data, use the data analytics. You find the patterns, and the patterns tell the story. So all of you must go in for enriching yourself in the tools which are useful for the future. And that is something which I would, especially the youngsters, I see a lot of young people sitting here. And for them, if you really want your career, you must go and learn these. Second point on the, and second point I was also happy was that you were all doing evaluation. Because the disconnect between the government's policy pronouncements and the implementation is huge. The 1960 education policy said that we will have universal compulsory education by 1970. Lo and behold, today we are 2025, and we still don't have the compulsory education for primary schools. Not at all. Right? On the contrary, we have all the out of school children, you have learning poverty, you have got all these things. Now, why should the World Bank come up with these issues in their reports? Why can't SDPI come and say that these are our issues? Why should they get the credit for that? Of course, they have a lot of resources than you have. I have no doubt about it. But if you are focusing on the issues on stunting, on nutrition, on school education attainments, poverty of learning, all that should originate for you. You should get the credit for that. Of course, our media and our policymakers are enamored of institutions like World Bank and ADB and the IMF. They think wo jo kehte hain wo mana satak na hota hai. And that's not true. There are a lot of gaps and there are a lot of holes which they have. Other thing is, if you want really demand-driven, become a part of their teams and you will learn a lot from that. So if they're doing something on adaptation or something on mitigation or something on resilience, or they're doing something on AI, offer your services that we want to be part of your team. And the learning which you will get from that process, which is pretty hard process, will also help you in your subsequent work. So not only just be a recipient of grants, but become an active part of the whole process. The other thing which I would like to tell you is that in areas of focus, and because when I was in the PM office, I saw Abid very active in the Ministry of Food and Natural Resources. And he produced a dashboard. पता नहीं वो काम कर रहा है अभी कि नहीं कर रहा, खत्म हो गया. So he produced that dashboard, which is very useful. And that's the weakest ministry. So if you're talking about, capacity building, which I heard from all of you, Ministry of Food and Natural Resources is the ministry, and the Ministry of Water Resources is another ministry, and the Ministry of Climate Change is another ministry, where I think the demand-driven studies and demand-driven programs and projects, you can help them. Because these are the ministries which have a lot of important mandates, but their capacity to deliver is pretty bad. So here you are actually supplementing their efforts. So I was very happy when you said you're doing impact analysis. So monitoring of the programs and the projects and the policies which are ongoing, evaluation of those who have been completed, and impact analysis, which is quite different from monitoring and evaluation of the programs and the policies, is what your demand-driven agenda should be. That is what you should be able to provide. Provincial governments don't pay any attention either to the climate change or to disaster management. जब आके पड़ती है गले पे तो उस वक्त कर लेते हैं, लेकिन उन्होंने कोई प्लानिंग नहीं की होती. तो आप जो एंटिसिपेटरी कर रहे हैं, बड़ी अच्छी बात है. That I think is a very good thing. So help them in the weaknesses and the gaps which you think are going to help in the focus areas which I have pointed out to you. So demand-driven is demand to meet the requirements of the government ministries and the provincial departments. That's to me demand-driven. Not कि जी FCDO ने कहा कि ये हमारा project है, इसमें आप कर लें. You should go through your strategic plan to FCDO that this is our plan. We want you to help us in this particular project or this program. So you should be in the driver's seat, rather they will tell you what to do. And you go and say, I have a request for proposals and we are responding to it. We are creating the proposal and we will present it. We will compete with others. उनको भी आप जाके कहें कि this is our strategic agenda. You tell us what are your areas of interest. We think this is our areas of focus and we want you to help. So बजाय इसके कि वो आपको कहें, आप उनको कहें कि जी हमने ये करना है. So those are some of the things. And policy briefs तो आप करें और policy briefs को आप उनको दें और उनसे फीडबैक मांगें कि ये पॉलिसी ब्रीफ उनके लिए यूज कर. देखिए, क्योंकि मैं रिसर्च बैकग्राउंड से आया था, तो मुझे बड़ा शौक था जब मैं स्टेट बैंक में आया कि मैं रिसर्च और एविडेंस को यूज करूं इन दी पॉलिसी मेकिंग. बट देयर वाज अ टाइम लैग. जब मैं पाइट को कहता था या राम्स को कहता था या IBA को, वो कहता जी 3 महीने लगेंगे. और आबिद को पता है कि फैसले जो होंगे वो कल रात के आज रात को हो जाएंगे. सो आई हैड नो piece of paper of researchers to rely upon, what I'm going to do as far as the policy making. So this gap and disconnect, that's why I say कि demand driven जो होना चाहिए, आपको anticipate करें कि क्या है, और पहले मैंने जो आपको supply side भी बताया, ये दोनों converge हो जाते हैं इस पर. So you have to anticipate. तो मुझे तो policy brief उस वक्त चाहिए जब मैं जाके argue कर रहा हूँ ECC में कि ये wheat procurement की आपकी policy है, इसकी इतने खराबी है, this is wrong, what should be done. So I have the SDPI study which shows that instead of the compulsory procurement, you should have strategic reserves, and when you have lean months, you release that from reserves so that the prices are stabilized. तो farmers को भी नुकसान पहुंचेगा. I'll just give you one example that if I have that research, I'll go to the ECC and argue. बट अगर वो कहेंगे जी 3 महीने के बाद हम आएगा, वो तो फैसला वो हो गया और बड़ा गलत फैसला होगा. So I think those are the things. Now I have no doubt about it कि ये जो मैं कह रहा हूँ आप सब उससे इत्तेफाक करेंगे, मगर आपके अपने कंस्ट्रेंट्स हैं. There are tensions and the trade-offs. आपकी तनख्वाहें जो आ रही हैं वो डोनर के पैसों से आ रही हैं, और कल डोनर आपको कहेगा कि जी हमें ये प्रोजेक्ट्स आपके पसंद नहीं है, हमारे प्रोजेक्ट्स करें. यू हैव ए प्रॉब्लम. या तो नौकरी खत्म हो जाएगी, विच इज हार्ड थिंग टू डू दीज डेज, और आप फिर उसी लाइन में ही चले जाएंगे. सो व्हाट आई एम सेइंग इज हैज टेंशंस. इट्स नॉट ए इजी रोड मैप फॉर द एग्जीक्यूटिव डायरेक्टर और फॉर द सीनियर स्टाफ. वो तो यही कहेंगे ना कि अच्छा हमारा तरीका तो यही है, हम तो यही करेंगे, आप उसमें compete कर रहे हैं तो करें, वरना और हमारे पास बहुत सारे लोग हैं और हैं वो जाके compete करेंगे तो आपको नुकसान होगा. तो कहेंगे जी इश्र साहब ने हमें ये मशवरा दिया था, हमारी तो रोजी बंद होगी कि प्रोजेक्ट आने पर. ठीक है. सो आई रियलाइज दैट दिस इज ए बिग टेंशन. दूसरा ये है कि जो उनके भी प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं उसको आप उनके ट्यूआर्स जो हैं उसको मॉडिफाई कराएं कि भाई ये टीआरस में हम ये चीजें करना चाहते हैं ताकि इम्पैक्ट जो होगा पाकिस्तान के ऊपर वो अच्छा होगा. वो भी उनकी मर्जी है कि वो आपको इतनी फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी देते हैं कि वो टीआर चेंज करेंगे कि नहीं करेंगे. इफ दे डोंट देन यू आर स्टक. एंड देन देयर इज ए whole question of the career progression. In a think tank, and because I spent 1 year at Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, a very famous think tank, अब ट्रम्प ने आके उसको खत्म कर दिया, and I had the chance of visiting a number of think tanks. Think tanks में titles, promotions इस पे नहीं जाते. उनकी जो पहचान है कि उन्होंने क्या काम किया है और उनका कितना नाम है फील्ड में, एंड लोग उन पे अट्रैक्ट होते हैं. और उनकी तनख्वाहें चाहे कुछ भी हो, लेकिन उनको जो वहाँ से दूसरी जगहों से अट्रैक्शन होती है, वहाँ से जो काम मिलता है, दैट इज मच मोर देन व्हाट दे गेट फ्रॉम द थिंक टैंक्स. बिकॉज थिंक टैंक्स जो हैं वो इतने पैसे नहीं दे सकते, वो डोनर फिलैंथ्रोपिक मनी पे जाते हैं. बट जिसने अपना काम जबरदस्त कर दिया हो, जिसका नाम हो, उसको तो हर जगह से ऑफर्स आती हैं कि ये भी हमारा करते हैं, ये भी हमारा करते हैं, ये भी हमारा करते हैं. बिजनेस हाउसेस से, प्राइवेट सेक्टर से, गवर्नमेंट से, हर एक से आती हैं. दे नीड एक्सपर्ट्स. तो आपकी जो पहचान होगी, आपकी करियर प्रोग्रेशन है, वो आपका नाम होगा कि आपने क्या प्रोड्यूस किया है. अगर आपने खाली रूटीन में ही काम किया हुआ है और कोई आपका नाम नहीं है, तो देन आई थिंक यू वोंट गेन फ्रॉम दैट. बट इफ यू हैव मेड ए नेम, कि मुझे अगर है कि यार मैंने एक्सचेंज रेट पॉलिसी पर किसी को हायर करना है स्टेट बैंक में और माय कंसल्टेंसी एडवाइस, तो मैं किसको करूं? अच्छा एसडीपीआई में वो बंदा है, उसको बुलाओ, उसको करो. That's how we do this in the government. हम कंसल्टेंट्स बुलाते हैं ना आखिर, तो कंसल्टेंट एक्सपर्ट होगा, अपनी फील्ड में उसका नाम होगा. अगर नेपोटिज्म और फेवरेटिज्म है वो तो पाकिस्तान में बहुत आम है, but I'm saying from the intellectual honesty point of view that this is what I think is important. तो ये बड़ा ब्रॉड क्वेश्चन था आपका, मैंने इसको पूरे में समेट लिया क्योंकि you can't have the skills and capacity unless you have the overall picture and where these skills and capacity are then fit together.
So thank you very much. I think all points made were very valid and will definitely be good learning points for all of us. Sir, then my next question is a bit.
मैं इसको इंटरेक्टिव रखें, जो मैंने अभी कहा है ना, I want them to react and give me their views and questions or comments, and that is how we should have it.
जी, ताहिर साहब के पास अगर माइक ले मैम, आप पहले स्टार्ट करने हैं.
So I have a burning question about what you just mentioned. So I have a question around demand-driven research that you talked about, and also about the disconnect between how a fine design of research is put on the table and how it is pulled off at the institutional level. So again, I would like to refer to that around a decade ago, we were taught a very celebrated paper by Danny Roderick, Goodbye Washington Consensus. And the whole crux of the paper was that unless you have very solid institutional reforms,
Right.
there's not going to be a blueprint for economic growth or success by the end of the day. So again, what we feel that it is rightly mentioned by you that it should be demand-driven research to a greater extent. For example, I can speak for the Center of Evidence Action Research, that is essentially demand-driven research that we do, to an extent that it is actually a sense-making session with the policymakers and the entities. It is only facilitated by the donors. But what exactly is the need of R in terms of research and what research those entities are missing upon, we figure that out and we do it for them.
Good.
With very cumbersome field assessment, with very cumbersome data collection. And we do come up with a very fine design on the table. And again, if I see the intent of the development partners, they're very holistic. For example, when they roll out these demand-driven research or the generic RFPs, they talk about very intricate cost-benefit analysis. They always talk about impact evaluation. They talk about a need assessment, mapping, a very stringent M&E framework. And then again, there's a lot of evidence. Again, it's all based on evidence. I don't think so I've ever came across RFP that never asked for a theory of change or the intended impact. Then again, there's a whole focus on pilot testing before scaling up of innovation. I mean, this is
proof of concept.
Exactly. So, but again, when we put this fine design on the table, what we see that somehow that holistic mindset is there, but not to a greater extent of evidence embedding into policy making. That fine design loses the rigor. Somewhere the M&E frameworks are not in place. Somewhere they're not stringent. For example, the post-impact, the post-completion performers are not submitted. So, I mean, this is more like, I mean, the timelines of the institutions, they do not match with the fine techniques of impact evaluation. I mean, there's a averseness to RCTs, which is the gold standard of evidence. Of course, the development sector, they emphasize and they push these impact evaluation through the corridors. But again, and sometimes it's very disheartening to see how the design gets tweaked or loses its rigor or spirit or energy during the implementation. So how do we deal with that? Because by the end of the day, the whole notion and the objective was the intended impact that happened to a smaller extent and not by the full power that was actually for which it was designed for. So how do we...
By the way, I'm a skeptic of RCT. For the micro level, in the particular context, I will go along with it. But on the macro level, to generalize on the basis of RCT, I'm very uncomfortable. But as you say, it has now become gold standard. Abhijit and Esther have bought everybody, and JPAL is now one of the most successful, research institutions in the world making millions of dollars, and they have spread all over the world, and all the donors are now supporting them. So I'm a big skeptic of RCT. I don't think this can be applied to the whole country's economy. Yes, in Avaran, if you're doing RCT, you will get a very different results as compared to if you do in Islamabad. Islamabad is 95% non-poor. Avaran is 95% poor. Which would you apply to the entire country? The findings from Islamabad or your findings from Avaran? So I have great difficulty in this. But on the question of you have to make compromises. There's no world where you cannot make compromises. There is a tension or a trade-off between rigor and relevance. For a country like Pakistan, we may compromise on rigor, but don't compromise on relevance. That's my advice to you to answer your question. They want rigor, and you say, I'm very much interested in relevance. How can I apply it to my countries? So your way of thinking should be evident to them. And by the way, Danny is right. My book, Governing the Ungovernable, acknowledges that I drew my intellectual capital from Danny through his work. And Acemoglu's Nobel Prize with Robinson is also a vindication of what he was saying at that time, that it is the institutions which are the backbone of any economy. So that is now accepted, theory. ताहिर तो सवाल ही करता रहेगा इसको हाँ ताहिर
जी जी डॉक्टर साहब थैंक यू वेरी मच आई स्टिल वेरी शॉर्ट क्वेश्चन आई स्टिल
खड़े हो
रिमेम्बर
जाओ जरा तुम नजर नहीं आ रहे हो मुझे
मैं खड़ा हो जाऊं आई स्टिल रिमेम्बर that I reported your appointment as Governor State Bank and Business Recorder, you remember. And I knew it before you came here through family resources and they tell and all that. You and Moin Afzal. I would regularly and sometimes in a very tough way criticize you. I still remember that on Pakistan television, we would record interviews in your annexee in this here in the office, and very tough questions would be carried along with your explanation and order, and that was on PTV. Today, it's not possible. Do you think the environment is no more there? And second, narrative has become more important than the understanding. They say, understand and communicate. Understanding has fade away in some shadow or something. Narrative is important, and rightly you said that if you will criticize the donor, where would you get your service from?
Don't criticize.
Try to say placate with the facts.
You have to work with them. That's
it is very difficult.
Publicly criticize नहीं करना चाहिए. That is not right, because वो annoy हो जाते हैं फिर उससे alienate हो जाते हैं. You don't want to alienate them. You work with them. That's what I'm trying to say.
So, do you think that there is a space still that truth, which is research, should get out of the shadow of the narrative?
देखो बात सुनो. I have stopped going to any talk shows since 2018. Why? Because they don't allow me to complete my sentence and the anchor बीच में अपना नैरेटिव जो है वो ले शहजाद गयास उसका शो होता है पाकिस्तान एक्सपीरियंस 1.5 घंटे उसने मेरी खिंचाई की है. तुम तो इतनी खिंचाई नहीं करते थे, उसने कितनी की है. वो मिलियन व्यूअर्स ने उसको देखा because he allowed me to explain my viewpoint and his criticism ताकि उसको समझ आए कि क्या हो रहा है. कामरान खान ने मेरा 2 दफा इंटरव्यू किया है. It has hit thousands of people because I was able to explain the whole problem. इसमें provinces और local governments का था. उससे पहले वो था जो इकोनॉमी की स्ट्रक्चरल रिफॉर्म्स पे था। सो आज तो मौके बहुत ज्यादा हैं, लेकिन उसमें से तुम्हें वीडियो क्लिप्स निकालने पड़ते हैं कि वीडियो क्लिप्स जो हैं, जो मैसेज दे रहे हैं वो नहीं। हमारे आजकल की जो जनरेशन जी है, उसका स्पैन टिकटॉक और इंस्टाग्राम है, तो you cannot have a 1.5 hour interview with Kamran Khan. So things are changing. I don't care for the, PTV or Geo or Sama, but I do care for the YouTubers who are actually doing a very good job in extracting information, engaging in discussion. And from there, that's why I said the dissemination जो होगा, वो आपका dissemination बड़ा टारगेटेड होगा कि कहाँ आपका मैसेज जा रहा है।
They're already doing it. SDPI, bought it. This was
Good.
the first web TV in Pakistan that started.
Good.
Came from Europe that time.
Dr.
They are doing it on TikTok.
वेरी गुड,
I'll show you.
बहुत अच्छा है,
That will-
बहुत अच्छा है।
अली जाबिर।
सर मेरा क्वेश्चन सर आपसे ये था कि
ऊंचा कर,
हमने सर जो अभी एक ट्रेंड देखा है कि जिस तरह आप कह रहे हैं कि सप्लाई ड्रिवन को प्रेफर किया जाए, अगर डिमांड ड्रिवन हमने करना भी है तो उसमें हमारी अपनी इंटरवेंशन हो, मगर जो पब्लिक रिस्पांस सर हम देखते हैं अपने इवेंट्स में, जो डिमांड ड्रिवन यानी डोनर साइड का इवेंट या टॉपिक है, अगर मैं एग्जांपल देता हूँ, SDPI इस्लामाबाद का वाइट थिंक टैंक है, जिसने जब ये हेल स्टॉर्म इस्लामाबाद में पहली बार हुआ तो हमने इस पे सेमिनार करवाया, एक्सपर्ट ने आके ब्रीफ किया, बाद में बाकियों ने फॉलो सूट किया और हम स्टार्ट ले रहे थे, मगर इससे पहले हमने कार्बन मार्केट्स पे यहीं पे हमारे एनर्जी यूनिट ने और बाकी ने मिलकर एक वर्कशॉप कराई, दोनों में सिमिलर काइंड ऑफ ऑडियंस को हमने इनवाइट किया था। जो कार्बन मार्केट वाला था सर, उसमें बहुत ज्यादा रिस्पॉन्स था हमारे पास, जबकि दूसरा सेमिनार था क्योंकि उसमें भी डिस्कशन थी, हम डिग आउट कर रहे थे कि एविडेंस क्या होगा, क्यों हुआ, मगर उसमें रिस्पांस बहुत कम मिल रहा था। तो ये इसमें शिफ्ट है, तो इसको कैसे मैनेज करें सर?
ये आपको होगा, आपकी क्वालिटी ऑफ वर्क के ऊपर डिपेंड करेगा। अगर आपका कार्बन मार्केट्स जो हैं इस वक्त, एवरीबडी इज थिंकिंग यार किस तरह से हम क्रेडिट्स लें, हमारी फाइनेंसिंग ठीक हो फॉर क्लाइमेट, तो ये एक एस्टैब्लिश हो गया है, तो इसलिए लोगों का इंटरेस्ट है। ये हेल स्टॉर्म के बाद लोगों का कि यार एक दफा हो गया, पता नहीं कब होगा, इट्स नॉट ए रिकरिंग इवेंट। मगर डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट जैसे ये फ्लड्स का है यार, 2022 में इतने लोग हमारे मरे हैं, इतनी हमारी हुई है, 2025 में भी ये हुआ है। नाउ पीपल विल लिसन, क्योंकि रिकरिंग इवेंट हो गया है। तो यू हैव टू थिंक अबाउट व्हाट द इंपॉर्टेंस ऑफ द इवेंट इज। हर इवेंट एक जैसा नहीं होगा, तो आपका काम ये नहीं है कि आप एक्सपेक्ट करें कि एक इवेंट आपका जो था बहुत सक्सेसफुल होगा, हर इवेंट आपका सक्सेसफुल होगा, नहीं होगा।
डॉक्टर काशिफ।
सर थैंक यू वेरी मच। मुझे एक थोड़ा सा एक क्वेश्चन इस साइड पे करना है, थोड़ा सा ग्लोबल पर्सपेक्टिव में, कि वर्ल्ड जो है बहुत तेजी से ट्रांजिशन की तरफ जा रही है। एक तरफ तो डोनाल्ड ट्रंप जो है वो क्लाइमेट चेंज को नहीं एक्सेप्ट कर रहे, दूसरी तरफ फजा में इसराइल जो है हर तरह के जुल्म सितम कर रहा है, ह्यूमन राइट्स के इश्यूज हैं, कोई लॉ को वो नहीं फॉलो कर रहा। इंडस वाटर ट्रीटी है, उसको इंडिया ने डिनाई कर दिया है। तो जब ये दुनिया में एक ट्रेंड चल पड़ा है कि रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट और इस तरह की डिबेट को एक्सेप्ट नहीं किया जाएगा, एविडेंस ऑफ फैक्ट को नहीं किया जाएगा, तो हमें अपनी रिसर्च को कहाँ पे प्लेस करना चाहिए, और ये ग्लोबल फ्रेमवर्क में हमारी रिसर्च कैसे इंटीग्रेट हो, और कैसे हम अपनी पाकिस्तान के पर्सपेक्टिव को ग्लोबल पर्सपेक्टिव में जहाँ पे हम कंट्रीब्यूट करते हैं एज ए रिसर्चर, तो कैसे हम अपने आप को प्लेस करें। थैंक यू।
देखिए, मैंने पहले कहा, आपने जो बातें की वो एपिसोडिक हैं। ट्रम्प सारी जिंदगी तो नहीं रहेगा ना अमेरिका में, और 2026 के मिड टर्म इलेक्शंस में आई थिंक ही इज गोइंग टू लूज द कांग्रेस। वंस ही लूज द कांग्रेस, वो खत्म हो जाएगी उसकी जो इस वक्त चौधराहट है। इस वक्त कोई काउंटर वेलिंग फोर्स नहीं है, कांग्रेस उसके हाथ में है, सुप्रीम कोर्ट उसके हाथ में है, जो उसके खिलाफ बोलते हैं उनको जेलों में डाल देता है, केस करा देता है, तो वो तो ऑटोक्रेट है। बट 2022 में अगर वो हो गया, ये सारा खत्म हो जाएगा। बट ग्लोबल ट्रेंड क्लाइमेट चेंज का तो नहीं खत्म होगा ना, ट्रम्प के होने से या ना होने से। फॉसिल फ्यूल्स जो हैं वो कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड एमिशन तो करना बंद कर देंगे। सो यू गो टू द ट्रेंड, यू डोंट गो बाय ट्रम्प। और गाजा में जो हो रहा है, ये कब तक होता रहेगा? इतने जुल्म हो रहा है कि दुनिया अब जो है वो फ्रांस है, स्पेन है, यूके है जिसने कि इनको बनाया, कनाडा है, दे आर ऑल गोइंग अगेंस्ट इजराइल. तो इसराइल इज गोइंग टू बी आइसोलेटेड. आई डोंट थिंक दिस विल कंटिन्यू. ये जुल्म नहीं हो सकेगा कि बच्चे मर रहे हैं वहां पर, इतने लोग जो हैं रोज भूखे मर रहे हैं. दिस कैन नॉट गो ऑन. एंड देखो, द वर्ल्ड इज नाउ टर्निंग अगेंस्ट इसराइल. आई रिमेंबर the first resolution in the Senate, bipartisan resolution, was 92 to 8 against Israel. अभी जो हुआ है 73 to 27 US Senate में. Mamdani is getting the support from Jews in New York. Financing उसकी हो रही है. So don't go by this apparent thing. अंदर देखो कि Jews में भी लोग जो हैं वो नेतन्याहू से बड़े नाराज हैं. यूएस में पैसे भी नहीं दे रहे वो उसको. तो आई डोंट थिंक यू शुड टेक दीज एपिसोडिक इवेंट्स कि ये ग्लोबल ट्रेंड्स हैं. ग्लोबल ट्रेंड इज दैट यू हैव टू रिस्पेक्ट ह्यूमन राइट्स. यू हैव टू हैव क्लाइमेट चेंज टुवर्ड रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी. एंड चाइना, व्हिच वाज द बिगेस्ट एमिटर, हैज शोन यू कि उसने कोल की जगह आज दुनिया में सोलर एनर्जी लिया है, ईवीज लिया है. तो व्हाट आई वाज ट्राइंग टू यू कि आपके ग्लोबल ट्रेंड्स देखें आप, ये एपिसोडिक वेरिएशंस जो होती हैं वो ना दें.
जी, अली मुजाहिद उसके बाद.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर.
जो नहीं देते हो प्रेफरेंस होती हैं.
Sir, my name is Ali Mujahid and I have a very important question, that is, we do know that Pakistan consists of more than 65% of the youth. But when we go to the policy spaces, first of all, तो हमें इजाजत ही नहीं होती कि आप किसी policy space में जाएं. But when we go to such policy spaces, हम कि आप लोगों को कुछ नहीं पता. आप लोगों को कुछ नहीं पता, यू इनएक्सपीरियंस. हमें नहीं पता है, हम 17 साल के हम बैठे हैं, हमें पता है. You are not competent enough to even sit in such policy spaces. तो ऐसे में हम जो है हमें जगह नहीं दी जाएगी. जो 65% को आप इग्नोर करते हैं, तो हाउ कैन वी गो, मतलब पॉलिसी की तो फिर बात ही खत्म हो जाती है वहाँ पे.
आपको अभी पॉलिसी में पार्टिसिपेट करना है. आप जो भी आपका प्रोफेशन है उसमें आप एक्सेल करें. अगर आपने डॉक्टर बनना है तो वो डॉक्टर बने. अगर आपने इंजीनियर बनना है तो इंजीनियर बने. अगर आईटी बनना है तो आईटी बने. आप खाली यूथ होने की वजह से आपको पॉलिसी में नहीं आना है. आपको अपनी एक्सपीरियंस और आपकी काबिलियत पे आना है. सो डोंट एक्सपेक्ट दैट द पॉलिसी मेकर्स will listen to you because you have no background for the policies. Equip yourself with both the knowledge as well as experience, and then people will listen to you.
जी सर.
Thank you. Sir, personally as a researcher, because I shifted from academia directly towards this Policy Research Institute. So as a researcher, what I feel is what demands my research is, or rather what drives my research is pushing against the orthodox narratives, and that is not deliberate. Why? Because let me give you an example. For example, when I study the water challenges in Pakistan, I see one of the key narratives, that is the Water Apportionment Accord 1991. I find gaps in it, in a sense that there is no accountability mechanism for the provinces. For example, if water is being allocated to the provinces, they should be held accountable in context of how they're managing water theft, water pricing, industrial water usage. I don't see that as a success story, and that drives me towards doing a research on how this accountability mechanism needs to be enhanced. But then I face a challenge. Again, I don't have that much years of experience. So when I'm sitting in a hall where all those who are senior to me are posing Water Apportionment Accord 91 as a success story for Pakistan, I don't see it as a success story, because water is a dynamic subject, climate is a dynamic subject. As you said, we need to go by trends. And then you say that SDPI, you pose two questions, whether you want to establish a niche in certain areas or you want to go for the entire ecosystem or landscape. I believe to remain relevant, we have to go for the entire landscape, because there's more demand, whether that's at a national side, there's more supply side demand as well, whether that's coming from the donors angle. So I see, for example, other than the I'm in a think tank, and of course think tanks, they can't always pay you much or whether you're doing a free research or you're doing a donors driven research, that there are two different things. But every year when I set my agenda for the year, I see what is the less researched area that can drive change and that can push the narratives. I also get that push from the policymakers or from that senior side. But then I think the noise that I need to create has to be bigger from the evidence that I'm creating. Only the noise can help me in pushing my research agenda. So this is something that I have adapted or have learned by unlearning the things that I learned during academia. I've learned this while working at SDPI. And that's why I can feel his aggression, why he feels aggressive, because I work with the policymakers, I sit with them, but then this is an agenda that I need to push again and again by creating noise. So just to make myself more relevant.
No, you're quite right. But let me say that you have to recognize that we have to abide by the political setup of the country. We work all under that political setup where the elected representatives have the mandate from the people as to what they can do and what we expect them to do. So water apportionment, whatever its weaknesses are, you can point that out, but it is a prerogative of the policymakers, of the parliamentarians, of the provinces to make changes. And it's a highly sensitive subject. But there are a lot of things which you can do. For example, there is evidence that you get 148 million acre feet and only 48 million acre feet reach the farms. So you have such a conveyance losses. Why can't we do sprinkler? Why can't we do the drip? Why do we do the flood? Why are the modules which are located near the influential landlords all flooding there, and the tail enders are not getting there? Why the pricing is, when I was in finance department in Sindh government, all O&M expenses were covered by Abiana. Today only 10% are. These are the burning issues. Groundwater extraction. We don't know how much we are getting out of the ground, what are the reservoirs, how fast they are depleting. There's no regulation on groundwater. So you have such burning issues. Why do you want to apportionment accord? And for SDPI, water is, because it is a nexus of water, food, and energy, which is responsible for the climate change, for sustainability for the future, for livelihoods of the majority of the population. So if you ask me what the priority of the SDPI should be, it should be the food, energy, and water nexus. You have all the work you can do in this field, and there's a plenty to do this. But don't challenge what is accepted by politicians, because we cannot overrule them. We have no mandate. They have got the mandate. And this is a very difficult subject, which was a product of a lot of discussions and a lot of compromises. So the researchers like you and me have no business in interfering with that compromise.
Reconnected to this again, what I've been envisioning and learning, do you see climate change is considered as a non-traditional security threat, but do you see it as a traditional security threat
It is a
now?
traditional security threat. Who says it is non-traditional? Those days are gone. It is a traditional security. If you read my article, which is 2 weeks ago on the rural economy, how to revive the economy, this is the major issue. It is connected with your exports. It is connected with your income distribution. It is connected with your poverty alleviation. It's connected with everything. So how can it be non-traditional?
Any other questions? Okay, so sir, yes, please.
Sir, you mentioned that it is the mandate of the provincial elected representatives, but a lot of times we see that a lot of these representatives are actually overstepping their mandate. So how do we draw the line there? How do we sort of convince them in terms of provincial reforms that they should also stick to their mandate, because particularly if we talk about resource allocation and how these ADP funds are allocated, those funds should actually go down to the local level. But that's all the fight is.
Yeah, but if you look at what I've been saying for the last 10 years, when I was the chairman of the National Commission for Government Reforms, that we have a successful example of 2002 to 2007, where the local governments had 12 administrative departments, and the degree of satisfaction with the delivery of services was the highest in the history of Pakistan. So you have evidence which shows that resources should go to the local governments. But the provincial legislators
Yeah,
have no interest in doing that because they will lose their clout.
yeah.
So all we can do, and I've been doing this for 10 years, I've been sounding out everyone, both publicly and privately, as to what this can happen, how popular the political parties will become if people are satisfied with the basic needs. You know, what an individual in a city or in a village needs: education for the children, healthcare for the family, drinking water, sewage, solid waste disposal, roads and public parks. He doesn't care कि GDP growth क्या हो रही है, reserves कितने हैं. He doesn't care for this. This is what and who can deliver this best with least amount of resources is the local governments. They know how to utilize their resources and what are their priorities.
But over the years, they have been unempowered through legislation, through
Yeah, because there's a conflict.
exactly.
There's a
So
conflict
how do you
between
see?
you have to keep on harping on this tune. What you need is a constitutional amendment.
You
Well,
need to
constitutional
manifest it.
amendment, no, that is by the parliament.
Uh-huh.
The parliamentarians are not against the provincial. The provincial governments are.
Exactly.
And the provincial governments have to legislate. And they do not legislate in favor of this. But if you have a constitutional amendment under Article 140A, and I've laid down what the article should say and what the schedule for this will be, then nobody will actually deny them. So you have to bring in a constitutional amendment.
So how do you see we can navigate the political economy around this?
We have to keep on saying this, and there is now a lot of people in the parliament who follow this. They argue for this. So everybody is not on the same wavelength.
I mean, recently even Ehsan Iqbal wrote a tweet about it, but then his actions speak louder than words, I guess.
No, but if they are going for 27th Amendment, let's see what they're doing. I cannot just give up the hope. You have to keep on pushing. You have to be, your perseverance and patience are important. You don't give up.
Thank you very much. So, sir, I'll just club the remaining two questions in the interest of time. So this is a hypothetical question that if you were leading SDPI, what internal reforms and institutional practices would you emphasize to enhance effectiveness, credibility, and sustainability of this work? And you have already
I've
spoken
already
on it,
spoken,
yes, but
and I have no pretension that I know SDPI any better than all of you. So I will have no expertise in answering that question, but I've told you what my views are.
So just 2 points which will be related to this. One is, I think, the financial model that we can, how can we make SDPI more sustainable? And the second is, what type of international collaborations should SDPI have to make its policy impact more relevant?
Right. I think you have two windows of the financing. One is the core funding, and second is the contractual funding. So the contractual funding is when you are given projects by the government departments, by the private sector, or even by the donors. That's a contractual. If they fit in your strategy, accept them. But you need a core funding. And it's no harm in getting core funding from either the government or the private sector, because you're going to help them through the core funding. So what you have to do is to have a board, which is powerful board, which can influence the government or the private sector, because the board members cannot abdicate the responsibility of financing, because most of the boards consist of people who are actually involved in raising funds. And that is what the SDPI board should be doing. And the contractual will be with the executive director, because he is quite well known among all the donors. So he will present what the SDPI can offer and say, this is what we are going to do. We need your help, and where we can help you and what we can derive from you. So those are the two different. The private sector now is doing a lot of CSR, the corporate social responsibility. So if you have private sector members on the board, they can go and raise some funds for the core funding, which is not linked with anything, but it's a core funding. So I think you have, and then I've been arguing with the government that they should raise their research and development funds. My last article, if you see, on this whole question of industrial policy, I said we were doing 0.6% of GDP. It has gone down to 0.28%. There should be comparative research grants, and you compete for those research grants, which are aligned with the priorities of the government. So Planning Commission has some research grants, and you can compete for them. So these are the two sources of funding which you should explore.
And the other aspect about the international collaborations?
That always happens on two very important prerequisites. One is the image of the country, how secure, how safe it is to travel to that country, which is not the case of Pakistan at this moment. It used to be. I mean, I won't brag, but in my time at the State Bank, the foreign direct investment in 2005 and 2006 each year was $5 billion, which has never been the case in history, because the foreigners used to come and they feel safe and secure, and they said, if we come, we won't have any problem. And this is the time when we had the war against terror in Afghanistan. So it was not a easy time, but they were quite, satisfied that nothing will happen. But right now, even the exporting buyers, they meet in Dubai or Singapore rather than they come to Pakistan. So the researchers won't be coming in from the international think tanks to come to Pakistan, but they are all over India. You go to India, and I've been going before Moody quite frequently, and they were all there. They come as a summer fellow, or the residents or non-resident. So there are many ways to attract the international collaboration. The second is that there should be convergence between your strategic agenda and the interests of the international think tanks. If there's no convergence, then you don't have that kind of collaboration. And the collaboration always takes place at the level of the researcher. So if Abid is known for a certain research interest and he has made contribution, his counterpart in the same field will feel very, much relieved to work with him. He says, well, we are on the same wavelength. So it's a collaboration not between institutions. Pakistan में तो ये MOUs बड़े sign हो रहे हैं, हजारों MOUs हो रहे हैं between the institution level. That doesn't work. It is your individual collaboration. If you are in the same field and you feel comfortable, then you can do it.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, or we can go to the Umar?
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, sir. My name is Umar Farooq, and I am a student of अप्लाइड इकोनॉमिक्स। मेरा जो क्वेश्चन है ये पर्सनल लर्निंग के लिए है, तो मैं वो राइट स्पेस देख रहा था कि मैं कब आपसे जो ना ये क्वेश्चन पूछूं। जिस तरह कि आपने एसबीपी को भी जो ना वो आपने हेड किया है, तो मेरे ख्याल में ये राइट क्वेश्चन है कि मैं आपसे पूछूं कि हम किस तरह से जो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी है या हमारी जो फिस्कल पॉलिसी है उसमें किस तरह से एडजस्टमेंट कर सकते हैं कि जो हमारा इन्वायरमेंटल एजेंडा है उसको जो ना वो हम मीट कर सकें। अगर हम उसमें कुछ एडजस्टमेंट्स करते हैं, लेट्स सपोज अगर हम मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी को 1% हायर और 1% लोअर करते हैं, उसकी वजह से हमें वो कौन सी ऐसी चीज़ें हैं जो ऑफसेट करना पड़ेंगी। तो इसके ऊपर अगर आप कुछ अपने इनसाइट्स जो ना वो शेयर कर सकें।
देखिए, fiscal policy and monetary policy are interlinked. So the point of intervention is not monetary policy, it is a fiscal policy. तो आपका जो पब्लिक फाइनेंसेस हैं, फेडरल का और प्रोविंशियल का, उसमें एनवायरमेंटल एजेंडा के ऊपर, जेंडर एजेंडा के ऊपर, सोशल प्रोटेक्शन के ऊपर आपको एम्फेसाइज करना पड़ेगा. दैट इज वेयर यू बिल्ड इन द बफर्स. और जो एग्रीगेट फिस्कल डेफिसिट है, फिर वो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी को अफेक्ट करेगा. इफ यू डोंट डू दिस इन द फिस्कल, कि आपके जनरल के ऊपर उसका क्या इम्पैक्ट हो रहा है, आपके एनवायरनमेंट पे क्या इम्पैक्ट हो रहा है, और आपके सोशल प्रोटेक्शन पे क्या हो रहा है, बैकवर्ड एरियाज पे क्या हो रहा है, you won't be able to do it. So the National Finance Commission, which allocates the taxable pool among the federation and the provinces, should say education, health, social protection, environment और gender पर आप कितना खर्च कर रहे हैं. This is a criteria. The more you spend on that and outcome based. I'm not interested कि हमने इतने टीचर्स भर्ती कर दिए और हमने इतने स्कूल बना दिए. That's not the criterion. It is outcome. आपको अगर हम ये पैसे दे रहे हैं तो 5 साल में आउट ऑफ स्कूल चिल्ड्रन कितने कम हो जाएंगे, एनरोलमेंट रेशियो क्या बढ़ जाएगा, स्टंटिंग कितनी कम हो जाएगी. These are outcome based. You have to build in. जेंडर डिस्पैरिटी कितनी कम हो जाएगी जब अगर हम आपको ये देंगे. अगर आज ये female gender disparity had 3:1, will it become 2:1 or what? Backward areas of Balochistan, of merged areas of Fata, of southern Punjab, in rural Sindh, they are backward. We should allocate money so that they can develop. So these are the criteria where you have to make the allocations. हमने 82% of population पे रखा हुआ है. Population is not a criterion for resource allocation. So you have to change this. The fiscal policy का जो सबसे बड़ा काम है कि you allocate resources to the priority areas. In my way, human capital, environment, gender, backward areas, which are social protection. These are the areas where the public finances should go in.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, maybe we can go towards concluding the session. I will now request Dr. Abid Qayyum Suleri, Executive Director of the SDPI, to please conclude the session.
Thank you, Ahad, and thank you, Dr. Saab. It was an honor and a pleasure listening to you. I think every time we have an interaction with you, there are always some new things to learn, and same was today. I've learned a lot. अगर मैं अपने notes देखूं तो I think it's around 7 pages. जो कि मैंने
You're good to take
इस पे लिखे, and they are all very relevant. अगर हम डॉक्टर साहब की आज की डिस्कशन को, and thank you very much for being very honest and candid in providing us your opinion and advice. तो अगर मैं आज की जो डिस्कशन है उसको देखूं तो पहली चीज़ तो ये है कि हमें जो अपना सप्लाई साइड और डिमांड साइड उसमें एक बैलेंसिंग एक्ट मेंटेन करना होगा. हाउ वी रिमेन रेलेवेंट. ऑफ कोर्स हमारे पास जो फंडेड प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं वो हमारी प्रायोरिटी हैं, बट जैसा कि हम हमेशा से यहाँ कोशिश करते हैं कि with those funding projects we need to piggyback something जो कि अगर unfunded भी है, but if we feel के वो इस वक्त हमें relevant रखेगा तो हमें उस पे मज़ीद deliver करना होगा. I take your advice very seriously कि इस वक्त जो overlap चल रहा है और जो एक सेंटर्स हैं मुख्तलिफ जो कि एट टाइम्स देर competing, तो उस स्ट्रक्चर को हमें मज़ीद कंसोलिडेट करना होगा और ज़्यादा कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव बनाना होगा ताकि हम वो जो एक सेल्फ कंपीटिंग रेस है उससे निकल के अपनी रेलेवेंस वो एस्टेब्लिश कर सकें. आपने जिन चंद सेक्टर्स की तरफ इशारा किया जो कि इस वक्त रेलेवेंट हैं, क्लाइमेट चेंज इज़ ऑफ कोर्स one of them, artificial intelligence, tech advancement is still another one, or food security और जो geopolitical challenges. इंशाल्लाह जब आप नवंबर में तशरीफ ला रहे होंगे हमारी एनुअल कॉन्फ्रेंस पे, तो इस दफ़ा का हमारा थीम ही जो है सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट इन इमर्जिंग न्यू वर्ल्ड डिसऑर्डर, और हमने यही वो चीज़ें हैं जो कि उसमें हम डिस्कस करने जा रहे होंगे. और there is a ritual कि after every annual conference we sit together as a team and we try to chalk down our agenda of research and policy outreach for the following year. तो इस कॉन्फ्रेंस के बाद इंशाल्लाह हम 2026 का जब अपना एजेंडा चार्ट डाउन कर रहे होंगे तो many of these points would be discussed there. पॉलिसी ब्रीफ की जो एक सिग्निफिकेंस और इम्पोर्टेंस है वो डॉक्टर साहब ने रिमाइंड करवाई. और सो एज ए रिसर्चर ऑफ कोर्स व्हाइल वी कीप ऑन राइटिंग आवर ओपिनियन पीसेस टू रिमेन रेलेवेंट एट अ वेरी शॉर्ट स्पैन ऑफ टाइम, कि उस वक्त जो विंडो ऑफ अपॉर्चुनिटी है उसको कैप्चर किया जाए. आई थिंक वी नीड टू convert those op-ed pieces into policy briefs and research papers. उसकी जो एकेडमिक रिगर खोए बगैर, ताकि वो साइटेशन उसकी जो है वो हमारे पास आ सकें, पॉलिसी मेकर्स जो हैं उसको टाइम पे उसको देख सकें. That was again a very useful advice from you. On funding, आपका जो इस वक्त कोर फंड्स जनरेट करने के लिए प्राइवेट सेक्टर से या बाकी इंस्टीट्यूशन से, दैट इज़ समथिंग जिस पे कि हमें मज़ीद काम करना होगा. और लास्ट बट नॉट द लीस्ट, डॉक्टर साहब ने एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट की तरफ इशारा किया, और SDPI में भी वो कीप ऑन साइनिंग MOUs आफ्टर MOUs with very little implementation. MOUs and partnerships, they start with your individual networking and your individual partnerships. तो अगर आपके अपने partnerships हैं individual level पे, research level पे, unit level पे, तो only then you will be able to transfer from those individual partnerships into institutional arrangements. Otherwise ये जो टॉप बॉटम है वो बहुत ज़्यादा सक्सेसफुल नहीं होता कि आप पहले इंस्टीट्यूशन लेवल पे पार्टनरशिप कर लें, फिर हम सोचें कि अच्छा अब हम देखें कि इंडिविजुअल्स के लिए काम करने की अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ कहाँ पे अवेलेबल हैं. तो पहले हमें अपनी जो एक्सपर्टीज़ है, अपनी नॉलेज बेस है, अपनी जो स्ट्रेंथ है, उसकी बेसिस पे जो रिसर्चर्स के दरमियान पार्टनरशिप है वो फोर्ज करनी है. एंड देन वी हैव टू टेक इट अ स्टेप फर्दर के इंस्टीट्यूशनल पार्टनरशिप्स हो सकें. सो ऑल ऑफ देम देवर very practical, very relevant tips or advices, pieces of advice. We hope कि जब हम next time बैठ रहे होंगे तो इंशाल्लाह इस पे कुछ चीज़ों पे हम आपको अपना प्रोग्रेस जो है वो बता रहे होंगे. कहीं पे जो हमें challenges फेस हो रहे होंगे वो भी आपके साथ शेयर कर रहे होंगे. एंड we'll try कि इस जो परसूट ऑफ नॉलेज है उसको हम जारी रखें. Dr. Saab has very graciously and very kindly offered कि कुछ यंगस्टर्स जो हैं, कुछ रिसर्चर्स वो उनके साथ काम कर सकें ऑन डिफरेंट एरियाज. बल्कि प्रोएक्टिव हो के बाज़ जब वो आप लोगों के पीसीस पढ़ते हैं तो प्रोएक्टिव हो के वो आपके ईमेल एड्रेस मांग रहे होते हैं कि XYZ रिसर्चर ने अच्छा लिखा, मुझे उसके दे दें, ईमेल एड्रेस दे दें ताकि मैं डायरेक्टली उसके साथ बातचीत कर सकूं। तो प्लीज़ फील फ्री, आप कुछ लोग जो कि डॉक्टर साहब के साथ काम करना चाहें, वो एक अपनी ईमेल एड्रेस में आपके एरियाज ऑफ एक्सपर्टीज, आपके ईमेल वो डॉक्टर साहब के साथ शेयर कर दूंगा। और हम डॉक्टर साहब की इस ऑफर को हमें इसको कैपिटलाइज करना चाहिए और इससे फ़ायदा उठाना चाहिए कि आप डायरेक्टली इनसे मेंटोरशिप जो है वो ले सकें। थैंक यू डॉक्टर साहब फॉर दैट ऑफर।
ये बता दूं आपको कि मेरी वेबसाइट है अपनी, इशरत हुसैन, एस सिंगल है, वन वर्ड, .iba.edu.pk। उसमें कोई 300 मेरे आर्टिकल्स, रेफरी जर्नल आर्टिकल्स, बुक्स, इंटरनेशनल सेमिनार के कॉन्फ्रेंसेस के पेपर्स, वो इतने हैं, आपको वो एक्सेस करें, उसमें से आप देखें कि आपके इंटरेस्ट के क्या हैं। एंड इफ यू वांट टू एंगेज इन एनी काइंड ऑफ clarification, elaboration, this is a reservoir, I just want to open it up कि आप उसको फायदा उठाएं उससे, ताकि आपको दोबारा you don't have to reinvent the wheel because lot of work has already been done। या अगर उसको फर्दर आपने सप्लीमेंट करना है या उसको आगे लेके जाना है तो वो आपके लिए एक सोचने का मुकाम होगा। सो दिस वेबसाइट इज ओपन फॉर एवरीवन।
और मिला आपकी वेबसाइट जो है वो रजिस्टर में शेयर भी कर दीजिएगा। सो with this there is a small token of thanks for you for sparing
ये ना दिया करो इसमें
your time। नहीं
पैसे खराब होते हैं। I think
लेकिन हम चाह
it's gone।
हम
ये नहीं अब किया करो।
चाह रहे होते हैं कि आप जब भी तशरीफ लाएं आप
ये मेरे पास बहुत जमा हो गए हैं अब। I've been coming to all your conferences, तो हमें यही मिल जाते हैं।
लीजिएगा। थैंक यू जी।